you all for coming. The people who aren't here have no idea what they're missing. Anyway, what I wanted to say, and I will be brief. I know all of you have read our press releases and material, and those describe the incredible career that Brock Jobe has had and is continuing to have in the American decorative arts field. And I can't think of anyone who is more synonymous with scholarship and research and just interest and dedication to the American decorative arts field, and particularly American furniture. Brock has been involved with so many organizations: Winterthur, Spania, Colonial Williamsburg, author, tremendous research scholar, and so we are very, very happy to have you. I'll give just a couple thank you. Thank you very much. We were fortunate to have some items that trace their lineage to C.K. Davis, who was a prominent American collector. I'm going to let Brock tell the story, but I want you to know how this all happened. So we were contacted by a relative of William Davis, who was one of the sons of C.K. Davis. And one thing led to another, and Leonard Moss, who's here, who is actually the stepson of William Davis. So he's our consignor, and the items are from William Davis. All right. So this led back to C.K. Davis, and so here we are today. Brock, thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to you. Appreciate your
Well, thank you. You can see I dressed for the occasion. I'm sorry. All of you are dressed far better than I am.
You're in the country, you're all right.
I just come from spending all morning and early afternoon looking at furniture up in Haverhill, Mass. So I drove like a banshee to get down here for this event tonight. And I want to acknowledge Leonard. There he is, in the back. He has the stories about CK's personal life that I can't tell. Not because I wouldn't want to tell, but I haven't had that kind of background. My involvement with C.K. Davis is really through Henry Francis DuPont. And as Tom mentioned, I've been at Winterthur for many, many years, and I first came across the name of C.K. Davis back in the early 1970s, actually just a few years after he passed away. I was a student at Winterthur, and I had come across this book, which many of you probably know well, the Israel Sack collection. And there's an entire section of this volume 5, which is devoted to the C.K. Davis collection. And it has a picture of one of the rooms from the house. He lived in Fairfield. And it shows page after page after page of extraordinary objects. I mean, as good as you will find in any museum in the country. And in fact, many of these objects have ended up in museums all across the country. So I was curious, but then, like so many of us, you get interested in other things, you pursue other paths, and then, actually, about 6 months ago, I agreed to give a lecture at Winterthur on 5 objects that Mr. DuPont, Henry Francis DuPont, had passionately pursued. And much like C.K. Davis, Henry Francis DuPont was a grand acquisitor. In fact, I would have to say there wasn't much that escaped HF's reach. And in some ways, he was a competitor to CK, but he was also a good friend of CK Davis. So I agreed to give this talk, which is actually coming up on November 4th at Winterthur. And I chose 5 objects that kind of reflected Henry Francis DuPont's passion for furniture. And one of the objects I chose is a high chest of drawers. And again, many of you probably know this piece. It actually consists of a matching dressing table and high chest. And here are the pictures of them. I should have a wonderful PowerPoint to show you, but this is old school. And in fact, I can pass these around. So you can just feel the texture of the wood as that paper passes from person to person. But I'd always loved these 2 objects that you'll see in the images that are being passed around. It's a high chest and dressing table. The high chest is signed by a cabinet maker named Benjamin Frothingham. And you hear the name Frothingham, it's just a name that sticks with you. You don't forget it. Well, I began to research those 2 objects, and I had known them well for years in terms of the construction, but I hadn't realized what the history was. And I come to find out that Henry Francis DuPont acquired those 2 objects along with a number of others, including, and I will pass along another couple of images. Isn't it fun to do it this way? You can take ownership in these things. But I'm going to pass around an image of silver. 2 American-made, actually Boston-made, silver candlesticks with a matching snuffer and the tray for the snuffer, all bearing the mark, and this is an enlarged picture of the mark of John Burt of Boston. And I'll pass those around as well. Well, come to find out, all of these things had come to Winterthur in 1967, and they had all come from C.K. Davis. So my interest was aroused. I wanted to know more about how did these pieces come to Winterthur in 1967. Henry Francis DuPont died in 1969. So these came right at the end of his life. And Winterthur wasn't acquiring a lot at that time. But why did these pieces come to Winterthur? Then I sat down with a gentleman who I've known since I first arrived on the scene at Winterthur in 1970. His name is Charles Hummel. Some of you may know the name Charlie Hummel. Charlie was, for many, many years, chief curator at Winterthur. He was a student in the 1950s in a graduate program at Winterthur, and then he stayed. He was hired in 1955, and he stayed right up until his retirement in 91. And then, like so many of us, I'm retired now for 2 years. I go into work, I say work, I go into Winterthur every day. I arrive at about between 7:30 and 8. I stay till 5:30, 6 o'clock. I love it. And Charlie's the same way. I keep thinking, there is going to be a paycheck. It's going to come. One of these days. And I'm just building it up, and it'll be this massive check that will arrive. But in any event, Charlie has been just a godsend. He is, and I'm sure many of you have at your various workplaces. I see Harold here, and I'm thinking, Harold, we all have memories. And Charlie Hummel is the living memory of Winterthur. any question that comes up about the history of the place, you go to Charlie. So I went to Charlie. I said, Charlie, you were here in 1967. How did Winterthur get these pieces? And who is C.K. Davis? And so Charlie pulled me aside, and we had lunch together, and he told me the story, which I will relay to you. The story, quite simply, is this. C.K. Davis, whose portrait is right there, and there's a wonderful smaller picture on the table. C.K., one of the premier collectors of Americana in this country. You know, many of you are familiar with Mr. DuPont, or at the Met, Mrs. Blair, who formed an amazing collection. Or if you go back into the early years of the 20th century, Eugene Bowles, or I'm a Hogg, or Henry Flint. These are great collectors, and they're well known in collecting circles. C.K. is, frankly, I think, has been overlooked. His collection was every bit as fine as that at Winterthur. And in some respects, it was even better. His pewter collection was second to none. You could not find a better pewter collection in the United States than the collection that C.K. assembled. So I go to Charlie Hummel, and I say, tell me about C.K. And he said, oh, well, I'll tell you the story. So 1967, C.K. is quite ill. And he had actually been ill for some time. And Leonard, if I mess up on the story, don't correct me now.
Okay.
Cut me a little slack. Poetic license. And but the story that Charlie told me was that C.K. had been quite ill. Now, he had been, for many years, the president of Remington Arms Company. Major industrialist, very successful career. And he had, in building that career, had taken much of his resources and put them towards collecting antiques. Now, he put them towards other things as well, but antiques was one of his passions. He's failing. And he certainly had financial resources, but from what Charlie told me, the family was keenly interested in selling a few things from the collection to generate some income so that they wouldn't have to dip into the investments, but rather they would use this income for his day-to-day hospital and medical bills. So, Charles Montgomery, who had been the director of Winterthur, Charles Hummel, whom I've heard the story from, and a man named John Sweeney. These were the three kind of the triumvirate of leaders at Winterthur in the 1960s. They make their way up to Fairfield to visit, actually to see C.K.'s wife, Bertha. She was the one who hosted them, and they went through the house. Now, there's one other little piece to this story, and that is that Henry Francis DuPont, who had founded Winterthur, provided everyone with a job, he knew that this trip to Fairfield was taking place, and he went up to Charlie Hummel before they left and said, in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, would you mind if I went up as well? Now, what do you say to the founder of Winterthur? You certainly don't say no. So Mr. DuPont went up in his Bentley, and Charlie Hummel, Charlie Montgomery, and John Sweeney went up in Mr. Montgomery's station wagon. And they, Mr. DuPont is such an acquisitive collector, and he knew C.K. Davis's collection very well because he had visited C.K. in the past. He'd been through the house, seen so many things. And C.K. likewise had been to Winterthur and knew what was at Winterthur. They had a close relationship. Remington Arms was owned by the DuPont Chemical Company. So, and H.F. DuPont, although he wasn't involved in the day-to-day management of the chemical company, got to know C.K. through that business connection, as well as their common collecting interests. So they all arrive in Fairfield, and Mr. DuPont had made a list, actually, of things that he wanted the curators to take. And the lead item on that list was a slate top, so-called William and Mary style dressing table. And it's been published many, many times. The curators looked it over. And this is where it really gets interesting, because the founder wants you to take this. I don't know if any of you knew Charlie Montgomery. Unfortunately, passed away much too young in 1978. Charlie was a man with strong opinions, and he would stand up to Henry Francis DuPont. Charlie Montgomery, Mr. Hummel, Charlie Hummel, and John Sweeney looked at that dressing table, and they felt that they had real questions about the top and whether the top was original to the base. It was a great top. These are rare imported slate tops that were put onto Boston dressing tables and smaller tables in the 1730s. But they had questions about the authentic, they thought the two elements had been married, and they did not start out life together. And Mr. DuPont, to his credit, backed off, and Venator did not acquire that piece. Instead, we acquired what you see, the candlestick and snuffer, candlesticks and snuffer and tray. We acquired a number of other things, and the high chest and the dressing table. But Charlie Montgomery tried to hide one object that was in the house from Mr. DuPont. Mr. DuPont, once he got there, really spent most of his time talking to Bertha and consoling. I mean, her husband was really ill. In fact, he didn't live much longer. And so he was spending time with Bertha. But Charlie Montgomery knew that if HF saw one object in the house, he would not let it go. And you could not convince him otherwise. And that object, actually, he did find. And I'm going to pass it around because it might be the most bizarre object. It's not something you would think of. A two-armed wrought iron candlestick. And I will tell you that they brought it back, and this became the 63rd two-armed wrought iron candlestand to enter the Winterthur collection. DuPont had an obsession with these candlestands, and unfortunately, most of them turn out to be European of mixed origins. Is this one?
This is another one.
Oh, here's another one. If Mr. DuPont had seen this one, I'm sure this would have come along as well. But you could not talk Mr. DuPont out of a double-armed candlestand. And the reason being that he would routinely electrify it. And if you've been through Winterthur, you know that one of the characteristics, the ambiance of Winterthur is such that it's dim lighting. Mr. DuPont wanted to create the illusion of candlelight as you walk through the rooms. And what better way to do that than with double-armed wrought iron candlestands, which is, so that was the 63rd to enter the collection. So all of a sudden, CK came onto my radar screen because of that high-chested dressing table, which, and I'm going to say just a word about it as the pictures that maybe have passed around. These are, I mean, yeah, I'll just take, and again, imagine this is a big PowerPoint. But if you collect New England furniture, and you're serious about 18th century furniture, you're probably going to own a high chest. There are a lot of them around. They do show up quite often, but I have never seen another high chest in any collection, public or private, that is as pristine as these two pieces are. They have a number of unusual features. Now, they're made in Boston, and they're rather plain, as is characteristic of many of these second half of the 18th century Boston high chests. But first, a word about the wood. The primary wood on this is not what you might expect, which would be mahogany or walnut, but rather it's made of a wood called sabiku, which is an exotic tropical, much like mahogany. It's coming out of the same general area, but it's an exotic wood not typically seen in American furniture. But in terms of condition, they are remarkable. In terms of the dressing table, it has its original brass, and you do see that, certainly, from time to time. The shell, that fan-like shell, is so crisp that you almost can cut your finger on it, which is the way these were made originally. And there's been just almost no wear. Now, that might worry you. You might think, could it be a reproduction, until you open the drawers. And you start to look inside, and you'll discover that it is just perfect. The interior is a little white pine. All the construction matches what you would expect for a Boston piece. And what I was so thrilled about, and at this point, my wife has left the room. She's no longer interested. But these little drops, these beautiful little turns, they look like little acorn drops on, those are original. And if you collect furniture, and when you look at drops on dressing tables or high chests, and the high chest has the original drops as well, they almost never survive because they're just held in place with a little bit of glue. There's no nails, there's no nothing but glue to hold them in place, generally. And these are absolutely original. So the finials are original. Now you'll see one other thing too. There's a shell here on the base of the high chest, but not a corresponding shell up top. And in fact, many of these pieces had only a single shell. We oftentimes think that you've got the two large drawers, you would expect to see shells up and down below and up top. I'll tell you, there's a wonderful piece that I've looked at many times, Historic New England, where I know that the shell that appears here was carved later because it went through a particular dealer many, many, many years ago, and I'm sure it was felt that it would sell with a pair of shells. This though, was done more often than you would think, with just a single shell. So I was thrilled to learn more about CK through that dressing table. But now let me just kind of segue into another aspect of CK as a collector. And then I do want to talk a bit about what's coming up. C.K. Davis, because he was a friend of Henry Francis DuPont's, because he was a major collector in his own right, was someone who Henry Francis DuPont tapped when he, DuPont, decided that he would open Winterthur as a museum. The museum opens in the fall of 1951, and he creates a corporation, the Winterthur Corporation, which is overseen by a board of directors, a board of trustees, in essence. And CK is named as one of the members of that board of directors from the very founding of the institution. And CK had a very close relationship with Winterthur over the years. And I've gone back and looked at what he did for the institution in the 1950s. Now again, I said Winterthur opened in 1951. Beginning in 1952, and continuing through the 50s, really it was primarily through the 50s, he gave to Winterthur more than 200 objects. He donated more than 200 objects. He donated more than 100 pieces of pewter from his collection. He also made gifts to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities. He was a very generous man. He had such a love of the material, but he also wanted to see it placed in certain institutions where it would be seen and appreciated. But over 200 objects came to Winterthur. And so the archives at Winterthur, and Mr. DuPont kept every scrap of paper. The archives are filled with letters between Henry Francis DuPont and C.K. Davis. Largely letters from C.K. saying, I'm presenting you with this, and H.F. responding, thank you, and by the way, why don't you come down and spend the weekend with us? And he did on many occasions. Now, unfortunately, when we move into the 1960s, C.K.'s health really did deteriorate. And I was hearing from Leonard just, he was a huge man. And I hadn't realized this. You said 6'6"?
Yes.
And weighing close to 300 pounds.
Into the 300 pounds, yes.
He had severe arthritis, and I was looking at our correspondence, and in the 60s, again, he was a member of the board of directors throughout this entire period. He is invited to every meeting of the board of directors, but beginning in the 60s, he really isn't able to come. And he writes these very apologetic letters, but his health is such that it just is difficult for him to get around. Now, I want to mention one other person that relates to C.K. and relates to Winterthur. Clearly, there was a close relationship between H.F. DuPont and C.K. Davis. But there was also an incredibly close bond between Charles Montgomery and C.K. Davis. Charles Montgomery, who was the first director of Winterthur, hired by Henry Francis DuPont in 1949 to come and help start the museum. He's joined by Joseph Downs, who had been the curator of the American wing at the Met. And those two gentlemen were responsible for, in essence, transforming DuPont's vision into reality. Unfortunately, Joe Downs died in 1954. And so the responsibility of achieving DuPont's vision really fell on the shoulders of Charlie Montgomery. And Charlie, who stayed at Winterthur until 1970, when he left to come to New Haven as a professor of American decorative arts, and to also serve as curator of the Garvin collection. But up until 1970, from 1949 to 1970, Charlie Montgomery played absolutely an instrumental role in Winterthur. In fact, you could argue that after Mr. DuPont, Charlie Montgomery is the next most important person connected with the institution in its long history. But Charlie, before coming to Winterthur, had been a pewter dealer in Wallingford and had developed a close relationship with C.K. through their common love of pewter. And Charlie Montgomery ended up selling many, many, many pieces to C.K. So there was a wonderfully close relationship there. And I was actually, again, thrilled as I was going through our archives at Winterthur to discover that upon C.K.'s death, Charlie was named in the will to help oversee the dispersal of the collections. And he became very involved in 1968 and 1969 with overseeing what happened to the collection. So that's the background that I wanted to share with you about C.K. From my perspective, he is a collector who deserves to be put on that pantheon of collectors that are, as I said, that would include Henry Francis DuPont. I'm a Hogg, who founded Bayou Bend. The Flints, who started at historic Deerfield. He deserves to be put on that same level Now, I think probably we don't know him as well because he didn't leave a house with a great collection and open it to the public. But as a collector, his eye and his attention to acquiring the best was equal to any of those other major collectors. And there are a few things here that I just wanted to highlight. I had the chance last Friday, it seemed like a month ago, but I had the chance to look at what was coming up. And I know from what Leonard was telling me, again, some of the material in the collection, and the furniture collection numbered into the hundreds and hundreds. I mean, it was massive. The house was quite large in Fairfield. And some of the collection stayed with children, and there were several children. But much of the collection was dispersed, again, after CK's death. And as you saw in the Israel Sack volume, the Sacks ended up acquiring a lot of it. And the Sacks, I think you could argue, were an appropriate repository for the collection because CK had bought much of the furniture from the Sacks. So it was, in a sense, going back to where he had gotten it. And since then, it has been dispersed widely. So from my perspective, to see a small group of this material come up with that C.K. Davis provenance is a big story. It really, I haven't seen anything comparable to this from the C.K. Davis collection come up in my memory. I just, you'll see an occasional piece here and there that'll carry the C.K. Davis provenance, and it does carry a lot of weight. But I haven't seen anything quite like what's come up here. I'm just going to highlight a few things, and I have to say right off the bat, I am not a silver expert, but I love to hold it. And I, you know, and oh my God. Oh, well, now can I'm gonna just pass one of these around because, is that okay? Is that okay? Can I just pass one of them around? Okay. I want you all, first of all, to me, what? Yeah, you can charge for it, absolutely. These are London sticks. It's a pair of sticks. They're marked E. Coker. Ebenezer Coker was actually a specialist, a super specialist in London who made a great many candlesticks. I mean, the London industry was such that there were so many specialists that they became known. Certain people became known for candlesticks, certain people became known for baskets. But Coker made a lot of sticks. But what I want to do is, as I pass this around for just a moment, is I want you to just look at the condition of this stick. Now, obviously, the more you polish a stick, the more as you polish it, you're going to wear it. And I want you to look at how sharp and crisp the decoration on this stick is. And also bear in mind that it has a separate bobesh. So let's make sure that it ends up with the bobesh by the time it gets back to you or to you. I'll be in big trouble with Tom if we're missing a bobesh. But if you look at the underside, you'll see the hallmarks on the underside. Again, these are all cast parts. You'll also see, if you've got good eyes, you'll see that the scratch weight, that would have been the weight of this piece of the candlestick, is scratched into the underside. That would have been put on either by the assay office or by the maker. But either way, you're looking at, and I've forgotten the date of these sticks because you can date them very specifically, but you're looking at 1760 or so scratch weight marks. And you'll also see, if you look carefully, you'll see an N and then a superscript O and then a number. And these were part of a much larger set, probably a set of 8. Could even have been a set of 10 or 12. But I just want to pass them around because this illustrates the quality that was present in that collection. And he was extremely, CK was extremely fond of silver. And I just want to show you, while those are going around, I want to show you a couple of things in that vein that he gave to Winterthur. This is a Cornelius Kierstead, New York tankard. I'm going to show you two views of it, which you can pass around. A magnificent, magnificent tankard. But even better, this is a two-handled New York cup. That is one of the absolute gems of our collection at Winterthur of New York silver. And both of these objects were part of a group of about 10 pieces of silver that C.K. Davis gave to Winterthur in the 1950s. And this is extremely early. This would date right around 1700. This would be mid to late 18th century. And while we're at that, while you're passing that around, I also want to show you one of my favorite things that he gave, which I just think is just a honey of an object. A little cream jug. Now this is pewter. And again, I mentioned that he was so interested in building a pewter collection. In fact, he was president of the Pewter Collectors Club. He was very involved in the Pewter Collectors Club. In fact, I loved reading in the archives at Winterthur. He invites Henry Francis DuPont to come up to his home in Fairfield because there was a Pewter Collectors Club national meeting taking place nearby. And Henry Francis DuPont did make that trip up. And I think it was the first visit that Henry Francis, had made to see C.K. Davis's collection. But that's just a gem of an object. But those are all things that were given by C.K. Davis. So while that piece is being passed around, I have to tell you, I got the pick of the litter. I mean, Tom said, just choose whatever you like. And I have to tell you, the candlesticks, I love. I just love them. And, you know, it's not that they're unique. They're coker sticks that come up from time to time. It's the condition. It's the condition, I think, is so special about that. But the other, and the same would be true of this object. And I was just on the phone with somebody driving down the highway talking about this. I was telling somebody, we've got to come see this. Because this, you know, is obviously just a small box. It may well have been a tea caddy originally. Oftentimes tea caddies have that partitioned arrangement with spaces for the tea boxes. Now this one, as you can see, also has a strip of mahogany there along the back edge. Usually tea caddies just have the three compartments, but this one has a strip as well. And what that was used for, I welcome if anybody can tell me. I'd love to know. But it all appears to be right as rain. From what I could tell, the secondary wood, and obviously for things like this, you really are, you want to know what the secondary wood is. It appears to be red cedar for the partitions, red cedar for the bottom. I would suspect it's made either in Newport or in Boston. It does have its original English hardware. And notice how it has the two buttons, which I find just really fascinating. I haven't seen that before. So that when the handle, regardless of which way you turn that handle is not going to dent the wood. It's going to fit, it's going to hit against either one of those buttons. I'll see you later. How do I escape with this? I just think this is fabulous. Now, I have to be honest and point out there is a little bit of damage to one of the feet. When you look at it carefully, you can see that one of the feet has been slightly rebuilt. But I'm not aware of any other issues with this. So not only are we looking at an incredibly rare survival, we're also looking at something in great condition. And as if that weren't enough, you've got, this appears in one of the great early reference books on American furniture. And in fact, there's another piece that's illustrated in the same book, Wallace Nutting's Furniture Treasury, which illustrates thousands of objects. But this is the only tea caddy of this design that shows up in Nutting's Furniture Treasury. That book was published in 1928. The photo probably taken in the mid-20s. And it appears just as you see it here. Now this I don't think I can pass it. No, but anybody can take a look at it after. Oh, it has a history. And actually that's a good point. You'll see this is a typed label. And one of the wonderful sidelights to the C.K. Davis collection is that C.K.'s daughter cataloged everything in the collection. She wrote full-page descriptions with information about where something was acquired, when it was acquired, and she would assign every object a number. So this is F94, F for furniture. You'll see on some of the paintings it'll say P, whatever the number, and then a brief description. So that was put on, presumably by C.K.'s daughter, to, oh, and there's the illustration. There's the illustration. And it's really a corker of an object. It also has an older brass plaque, presumably put on in the 19th century, identifying that it was made for a particular, or it identifies a particular family and an owner, an early owner.
They did that with almost everything.
Did they?
Every piece, yes.
But just a beautiful, beautiful object. You know, I'm terrible about Santo Domingan versus Cuban, and it's a real dark, dense. I mean, if you afterwards be sure and pick it up. I mean, this has a lot of weight to it for something as small as it is. It's very, very heavy. Just a couple of other things. Oh, maybe one of you can shed light on this. I was looking at this, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. You probably know famous painting by Benjamin West, I think it's West, Benjamin West, of the death of General Wolfe. And it's a huge painting. And it was made into a print. There were prints made after the painting. But then, clearly, there were English trays made depicting the same scene. This is the death of General Wolfe on the heights of Quebec during what we think of as the French and Indian or 7 Years' War. But the color palette is the same as in the painting. So obviously the person who painted this was aware of the color palette of the painting, as opposed to copying it directly from a print. It is beautifully painted. This is all hand painted. I mean, it is just beautifully painted. And it's in amazing condition. And again, the documentation for when CK bought this, and I think he bought it from the old print shop, didn't he?
Yes.
For $225, I think, in 1941 or thereabouts. I forgot the exact. Yeah. But you know, I don't know much about this. Maybe some of you have seen others. It's in essence what we might call Japan on the back. It's sheet iron, tan sheet iron, but it's painted, and then it has this wonderful Greek key running all the way around, and the condition is mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. So, you know, I like this auction business. Isn't it fun? You know, but then I only pick the very best things to talk about. So we're going to just a couple other things, and I'll shut up. I'm not going to pick this up, but can all of you see this? I want to, well, I'll bring it over to the table. This is, in some ways, even more fascinating than the box. Where is the book? Oh, right here. Did you highlight the page?
Yeah, it's towards the back.
You want to just find the page? When I saw this, I didn't know what to make of it. It looked very, it's a little dressing glass. The box, the drawers, I mean, I'll just pass the drawer down. Secondary wood in that is white pine. The primary wood here is walnut. And the drawers are just perfect, absolutely perfect. But there was something strange about it, and the way it was clipped off here, I thought, this looked odd. And then when we were here on Friday, we were looking at it in nutting again, and lo and behold, here is the dressing glass. There's the dressing glass. It's that glass. It's got exactly the same hardware, but you can see it clearly has a pediment. It clearly has a veneered walnut pediment that presumably was missing. I have to believe it was missing in 1941. This was bought from the Saks in 1941 by C.K. Davis. And you can actually see the channel when you have, afterwards you can come take a look at it. You can see the channel where that pediment fit down into this piece. So it's had a loss. The good news is you have the picture in the book to tell you what it looked like originally. To my knowledge, this is unique. There are only maybe 3 of these Boston-made dressing boxes from this early period known. One was just sold at Christie's about a year ago, I think. That was in another great collector's. It was part of another great collection, the collection of Martin Wunsch. But it's from 1750s, 60s. This one is probably 1730s, very early, with ball feet. I've never seen another one of this design. And again, it speaks to the quality that CK was constantly aware of, whether it be that tea caddy, and I don't want to lose the tea caddy, so wherever it is. Oh, it's already back, okay. But that, and then the last couple of items, and I guess I can't really pass these around, but I do want to call your attention to 3 final items, and I won't go on very long. Philadelphia chair. Again, he had a number of so-called Chippendale chairs in his collection. This one, though, what I like about it is it has a wonderful history of ownership. And again, when you look at this piece, you'll see I don't know whether you can see it, you'll see his label right here. And this belonged to General Anthony Wayne. He was known as Mad Anthony Wayne. And it's a classic Philadelphia pattern in an old surface, which is what most people really want when they're out looking for furniture. It has the original corner blocks, except for this one, which is replaced. But otherwise, it's got the original corner blocks. It's good height to the feet. It has the original nails, those little nubby nails that are at the bottoms of the feet, the squash tomato, which is characteristic of Philadelphia bowling claw feet. There's a little bit of damage right here, but otherwise, it's really in good shape. And again, there were dozens of these chairs of this quality all through the house. But this is one that's coming up for sale, and it's got a great history. Philadelphia, 1760s. Really very, very nice. And then the last two items that and I'm not going to hold up the looking glass, but I would encourage you to come take a look at the looking glass, which is a London, probably London looking glass. What I got excited about, every auction has glasses, looking glasses like this. Almost every auction, you'll come across so-called mahogany Chippendale looking glasses. You see them everywhere. But when you start to look carefully at them, you look at the back side of these volutes, and you'll see they've been replaced or re-veneered. You look at the bird, and the bird is broken, half replaced. This one is really in remarkably good shape. The only thing, in fact, from what I could see, it has much of its original gilding still intact. The bird is almost perfect. When you look at it from the back, it does have replaced backboards behind the silvered glass, but if you were to take those backboards off, what you would find, and you can see it actually when you look carefully, it's the way these looking glasses were made originally. The glass, the silvered glass, was not to be placed right up against the backboard, but instead it would be a series of wedge-shaped little triangular blocks that would be glued on the inside edges of the frame, and they would hold the glass in place, and then the backboard would go over that. So there was always this airspace between the glass and the backboard because of these small triangular blocks. Well, the blocks are still in place on this one. Unfortunately, it's lost its backboards, but those have been replaced in the 19th century. But it still has those wedge-shaped blocks, and all of the volutes are in good shape. So it's a nice, basic type, but you rarely find them in this good condition. And then the last thing, which illustrates kind of the range of things that CK had. He wasn't just collecting 1730s or 1760s. He was collecting things made from the late 17th century right up to the Federal period, the early 1800s. And this is a Baltimore card table made around 1800, perhaps 1805, with a double swing. In other words, the two rear legs, both rear legs, swing back to support the top. Really nice mahogany that's used, solid mahogany that's used for the top and the leaf. Again, if you look at it from underneath, you'll see that it's undisturbed. So often these have had compromises, changes, but this one looks absolutely right. One of the really nice details on this is that you can see that they have glued a cloth to the top of the swing legs, swing rails, so that when this slides in, you're sliding it up against the cloth is what's providing a certain amount of protection between the wood and the top. And that you do see, it's an original feature that you often see on these federal card tables, but more often than not, it's been removed or replaced. So these are some of my favorite things in the sale, and they illustrate kind of the mindset, the collecting ability of that gentleman right there. And I have to say, and I say this with great admiration directly to Leonard, I have to tell you, from my perspective, C.K. Davis was one of the finest collectors in America. Thank you.
Well, I did want to say one thing about the controversy over the slate top table.
Yes.
I so heard that a few times. And I think there was some controversy over after he left, because I heard that story a couple of times.
Oh.
And getting to the chair, that also came from the Randolph-Hearst collection, I think?
That's right, this was William Randolph-Hearst.
And there was the other table from the John Hancock family?
I think that there's another table that has a John Hancock family history.
Yes.
However, that one has a little bit of an issue because the top is not original to the frame. And that's something we have been able
Okay.
to determine.
Actually, Tom had mentioned that when he picked it up, he thought there might be.
And I think that's true, you know, and you'll see, those of you that wander around and look at, there is a small, a diminutive Queen Anne drop leaf table. And it's a beautiful frame with the most delicate legs. At the top and the leaves were added, they were replaced, they're replacements from the 19th century. And that speaks to the reality of every collector's experience. I mean, H.F. DuPont was no different than C.K. Davis. There are certain things that entered the Winterthur collection that subsequent research proved to be different than what he had thought. We have at Winterthur, one of the great rooms at Winterthur is the Chinese parlor. This magnificent space with Chinese wallpaper on all the walls. And it's filled with some of the greatest American Chippendale furniture ever made. And it's filled with 3 English chairs with replaced crests and pieced posts that just he missed. He thought he was getting great Philadelphia chairs, and they weren't. They were restored English chairs. I have nothing against English chairs, but that's not what he thought he was getting. And that's just the nature of collecting. Well, please, I encourage you all to have a look around, and Leonard can tell you, if any of you want to know more about C.K. the man, please speak to Leonard, because he has wonderful stories about him as an individual. What I know really comes from the Winterthur archives and all of the generous things that he did for us.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Sure. Oh, sure, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Oh, and by the way, original slip seat that goes with the chair. And what's nice is it's also, you'll see the chisel cut VI 6. This was number 6 in the set. And oftentimes the slip seats get separated from the chairs. But here we have this chair has the VI cut in the front seat rail, and it has the matching slip seat. Oftentimes you'll see that the seat is numbered 3 and this chair is numbered 6. Just as with the candlesticks, which if you look at the bobeshes of the candlesticks, they're different numbers from the stick because they all got mixed up.
One of the things I wanted to Thanks, Wayne. To point out here is we call it an airline. You see the lightness right here. What this is about is, so let's say 1760, thereabouts. So since then, in one form or another, with some covering or maybe no covering, this seat has been residing on top of this frame. And these glue blocks telegraph because the air doesn't get to this part of the seat, so it doesn't oxidize. So when you look at this, what is this, cedar?
I think it's white cedar.
White cedar, I think. So you see these original glue blocks, which are semicircular, and they're actually composite. They're usually 2 pieces. So it's just one of the things that we look at. Careful. But it's just very interesting. You see this something you kind of take for granted, but it's one of the things that you see when you look at a piece like that.
Any questions? We're happy to take questions.
There must be somebody with a question.
I have a bad one.
What?
I have a bad one.
You have a bad one?
Yeah.
What's that?
A question I had what logo you started with.
Oh, yeah.
Better pair.
Oh, you
They
would?
say cabinet, they don't think they're here.
Well, all I can tell you, Harold, is when you look at the drawers, I mean, they are made exactly the same way. And all of the,
They would be better seen cabinet. I'm not questioning the same cabinet, I'm questioning whether they were made as improved.
oh, I see. I mean, that's a good point. They might have been made at different times.
The one in John Campbell Lewis, the state professor there, I examined them for Bill Smith in 1971.
Did you?
And I appraised them for Bill Smith and sold them all for
Oh. Well, they went right up the chain.
I think they went to Christie's a few years ago and brought 175,000.
Oh.
Or Bill, his son.
It's Sabiku, S-A-B-I-C-U. And we knew that only by testing, because it had been, it looks a lot like walnut. It has a very open kind of grain.
I would kind of figured they would probably make one walnut when I was looking at the picture.
Yeah,
And I can see why.
Yeah, it's
really the current.
it's really, it was very puzzling. Yeah, question?
I love your enthusiasm for everything.
Oh.
It's
Yeah,
just wonderful.
I'm afraid that's my curse.
You guys at Winnetou ever like, because you know most of us are the same way, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
We get excited.
oh, yeah, I love this stuff.
You guys at Winnetou ever kind of ponder, we don't see enough young people at these auctions, and enough young people like, just, you at Winnetou ever like,
Yeah, we think
wonder
about it
what
all
we
the
can do to
time.
get the young people more excited, and what, do you have any initiatives at Winnetou?
I wish I could tell you we were doing something. We're not doing anything beyond what other people are trying. Well, we have great students coming in for our 2-year program, but that's a very small, you're talking, we accept 8 a year in one program and 10 in the other. And you're talking about a very small pool. But in terms of reaching out to a much broader audience, all I can tell you is that it's obviously the biggest issue we face in the business, regardless of whether you speak of the museum, antiques world. It's, I mean, you look around you right now, and not just in terms of Tom's business, but you go to all of these auctions that are taking place up and down the coast, and I'm more familiar with particularly the Northeast, but there's tremendous quantities of material that's just coming up for sale. Tremendous quantities of stuff. And there aren't enough buyers to acquire all of the stuff that's coming up. It's what the most popular lecture, in fact, I'm giving it in another month. The most popular lecture I give is entitled The Time to Buy. And my sermon is, my God, there has never been a better time to buy American antiques, particularly round wood, and certainly in my lifetime. And I think you've got to go way, way back to find a better time. I mean, the prices have gotten so reasonable for so much of this material. Now, the very best, and we're, here you've got some really extraordinary things, really extraordinary things. But, and they will do well. But the mid-range material that 20 years ago, people would buy to decorate with, they aren't buying. And it's what I lose sleep over, because I love this material. I mean, we have so much of it in our house now, I can't even sit down. But I wouldn't want to give up a piece, and so it is a challenge. I do a lot of lecturing about buying antiques and just pushing people to buy. Unfortunately, my audiences, the audiences, tend to be people over the age of 60. And so what are people over the age of 60 thinking about? They're thinking about downsizing, not about buying. And I'm just trying to straighten them out. But it's a huge challenge. You know, and there are many ways to address it. I happen to think that even if you've got a house full of IKEA furniture, to have a few antiques placed around just elevates the entire interior. And the beauty of these things, and now I sound like I'm selling it. I'm telling this stuff. But it's absolutely true. There is a story attached to every one of these pieces. And when you take it home, you'll remember that story. It's not just the story of having bought it from Tom Schwenke, or, gosh, I had to deal with, should I up my bid one more time or whatever. It's more than that. It's the story that goes back to, Anthony Wayne and getting you interested in, well, who is Anthony Wayne? His house is open to the public. It's just outside Philadelphia. Going and seeing other chairs from this set that might well be in that house. Or a Baltimore card table and going down to the Maryland Historical Society and seeing their collection of Baltimore furniture. Or going to the Met and seeing things that relate to this. And you have so much fun with this stuff. And there are so many stories that just, your head just fills with that kind of thing. And it's what I love about this thing. This is history in tangible form. This is real history. And I love to read David McCullough's books, and I love to read, all of the various Matt Philbrick's books and all the great popular historians. But a book will take you so far. This, to me, will take you a lot further because it's tangible. You look at it every day. You can use it. You can appreciate it. And you think about the stories associated with it. Why wouldn't somebody buy this stuff? And it breaks my heart, and I don't understand it. So I've gone on much too long.
No.
But you've touched a nerve. You have really touched the nerve. Because, I feel like I got to give every person under the age of 40 $1,000 and just say, go buy an antique. Here, go buy an antique. Because they can enjoy it. Yeah.
And then you become part of the history of that piece.
Yeah, you do. Let me just, this is not an antique as we might think of it, but I want to refer you to a blog post. And I just ran across this by accident. But to me, it said everything I wanted to know about why I want to hang on to antiques or hang on to old stuff. A woman in Pittsburgh has a blog post called The Catholic Table. And I'm not Catholic, but I found this blog post. And she's a Catholic, but she's also very keenly interested in cooking and drinking wine, and she provides recipes, and it's actually a great blog post. But she had one post that she did in this series called My Catholic Table. And she tells the story of a couple who came from Eastern Europe to Pittsburgh about the year 1900, thereabouts. And again, it's the classic immigrant story that all of us, I don't care how far your ancestors go back, you immigrated here at some point. We all did. And, but she tells the story of this couple that came from Eastern Europe. He went to work in the steel mills. They lived in a section of Pittsburgh, the Duquesne section of Pittsburgh, which was heavily Catholic. They went to the Catholic Church every Sunday. Came time, they had their first child, came time to move into a little larger house. They needed furniture. So they bought new. They bought in 1915, 16, a set of dining room furniture from a maker in, it was Lenore, North Carolina. So it's a modern, quote, modern set. It really was kind of a mid-19th century style, but it was made in 1915, thereabouts. house. So the table, this large dining table and the set of chairs become the family's table. It's where they sit down for dinner. It's where the kids grow up. And eventually the table passes to the next generation and the next generation. And it's that third generation where it kind of stays, it's always, there had been someone staying in the house. So there was a connection to the house. And finally, the elderly woman who was there, last of the immediate line, had died. And nobody, none of the heirs could take the table. But then they put it on Craigslist. And this is just a couple of years ago. And this gal who writes the blog buys the table and then goes back and researches the table. Just like, you could research Mad Anthony Wayne. And finds out this whole story about how this table and the chairs around the table were, and she puts it far more eloquently than I can ever express, but she talks about how this table was in essence the altar for the family, around which they came and talked and conversed and developed relationships that carried on generation after generation. And by this point, I'm just weeping. I mean, I'm reading this thing, and I've got tears are forming. And she ends it very eloquently in talking about, for her now, this table, which is over, it's 100 years old, for her, she knows that she is simply a steward of that table. And that she is going to make sure that that table is passed on, if it's not to her kids, to somebody who will appreciate what it is. And I thought, my God, that's what this stuff is all about. Because any of us that buy this stuff, we're not going to go out and use it up and throw it away. We are simply stewards who can enjoy it, can create our own stories, and those become part of the history that goes along to the next generation. That's what's so wonderful about antiques. I will never, ever forget that story. And I'll tell you, I owe her a tremendous amount of gratitude because she said it in just a few words in a way that I could never express it. I really thought that's why I collect. That's why I love this.
One of the things I wanted to tell you when you're talking about learning about the history of these pieces. Now, CK was running a huge company at the time.
Yes, Remington, and
it
during
was
World War II, too.
Right,
Oh,
they tens of thousands of employees. But Bill would have to read for his father because he was so tired of reading that Bill would have to sit there for hours at a time reading American history. And I mean, I have volumes of American history, and CK was not college educated, but he just absorbed knowledge. I mean, Bill even told me when the father went into the John that he'd be outside still reading for hours at a time because this man was so busy. But I mean, he was in so many different directions, and it's not just early American furniture.
So many.
I mean, I have the what I call the Roland Clark collection, which is a dub painter, and I also have the Ding Darling collection. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Ding Darling. He was a syndicated columnist, and he designed or the first duck stamp, the federal duck stamp, and CK also is co-founder of the National Wildlife Federation. Through Remington and himself, they donated $100,000 to start the foundation, and because of that, they came out with these stamps in I don't want to be incorrect in the date, but they produced these stamps. Now, not only do I have the proof stamps, but I have the stamps that they actually have the color bars to make sure it's corrected around before they even printed the proofs. And and I won't even get into what Bertha collected. I mean, as far as the Tiffany silver and the Lenox chinas and the different things that.
The collection was
it's just
monumental.
Really, and everything. I mean, the things that I went through. I mean, I found these beautiful duck decoys that were sitting on a shelf, and they were completely covered with dust because Bill wasn't good on dusting. And so I cleaned it up, and these things are magnificent, and I started looking. And then I see that they're hill decoys. You know what I mean? So you go to the internet, and it's like, I mean, everything is so, what should I say, collectible.
Yeah.
And another thing is just the simplest thing. I was telling you, I found an envelope, okay, and it's to Billy, okay, and it's a little note, and it's saying
So
about
this is CK's son.
this is CK's son. Okay, I'm sorry. And it's a thing about, you know, oh, we're your father's fishing companions on this certain fishing trip, and it's signed Teddy Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover. And
they all were together for a fishing trip. Can you imagine?
and on these different fishing trips with Senator Walcott and Marcy Dodge. I don't know if Marcy Dodge is the one that owned Remington typewriter and Remington arms before it was sold to DuPont. Yeah. But I mean, he because of his position, you can't imagine the amount of books that I have by these different authors that are signed, you know, to CK, all, you know, different wildlife, and Ansel Adams. I have an autograph from Ansel Adams and even Richard Nixon, but that was.
Let me just say, as a word of invitation, and I mean this sincerely, I know I'm in Woodbury, Connecticut, but if by any chance anyone is down at Winterthur on the 4th of November, you are most welcome to join me for the lecture. I'm going to be showing images of CK, and it will be a PowerPoint. I won't be handing out the photographs, but my appreciation for him has just multiplied manyfold from just having dug into the Winterthur archives and discovered just how important he was to the early history of our museum. So I will be sharing that, along with a few other pieces that came through other sources to Winterthur. Mr. DuPont was, let's just say, acquisitive. He was acquisitive. We should let you all look and have some refreshments, and I'm not going anywhere. Did you know that? I'm not going anywhere. So I'll be happy to answer questions. Now a box.
Thank you so much for sharing.